So the Promised Neverland manga has wrapped up, and I finally just finished chapter 181, and there's been a lot of controversy about this manga. A lot of people say that it's been horrible, it fell off. There's people that do enjoy it as well. It's a very mixed bag, but for the most part I've seen a lot of negativity towards this series, in particular following the events of what was adapted in the season 1 of the anime. So in this video, for the most part, I'm going to be covering everything that happened in the manga following that season 1. Now, I'm not going to cover every single detail because then we'll be here for days, but I got a good idea for the most part where the story started from that point and where it ended, and my opinion and breakdown on all this. So without further ado, let's talk about the Promised Neverland, people. I can't believe it actually friggin' ended. I'm still like, damn.
I say we gon' do what we do, no matter how you move, make your move. That's how it be though.
So before we continue with the video, I just wanted to let you guys know that today's video is sponsored by One Punch Man Road to Hero, a mobile RPG game available on the iOS and Android. This game is of course officially licensed with the same anime storyline and cutscenes. Not only that, but it'll also have content from season 2 and heroes from season 2 as well that'll be coming to the game. There's also idle rewards that let you play anywhere, anytime. So like, you know, if you're in bed, if you're on the toilet, if you're, you know, out and about, if you're on the stoop, whatever, wherever you are, you can play and still collect some rewards. And there's over 50 heroes to collect from the anime, such as Moomin Rider, Genos, all of your favorite characters. Create the strongest team and formation to rise in the ranks of the Hero Association leaderboard, so it's actually pretty competitive. And there's definitely strategy to the game as well. You could train and develop your characters to unleash epic ultimate attacks to kind of relive some of the moments of the anime. And there's multiple modes to choose from, such as story mode, tournament, which is PvP, road to be strong, adventure, mission, guild bosses, extreme trial. Like, there's just a ton of stuff to do. Again, the game is available on iOS and Android for free. Download it today and redeem the code in the description below for a free kickoff prize, so that way you don't just go in empty-handed. One Punch Man Road to Hero, iOS and Android. I'm just saying though, are you ready to be a hero? Let's do it. One Punch Man Road to Hero. Okay, so following the anime, after the escape from the orphanage, the Gracefield house, all of that jazz, all the kids were left, and to be honest with you, the story just completely changes. Like, I 100%, I've said this way back when I got to that point in the manga, and I'll still say it, that I feel the authors didn't really know how long their series would go, and they really probably only planned for that portion of the story, because to be honest with you, the story feels like an entirely different type of series afterward. I mean, it expands, so, and as it keeps on going, it kind of feels like, okay, this is what would have led after, you know, seeing what happens when they escape and all of that jazz. But the first season, you know, the first 30 or so chapters of the manga was them just trying to make it out of that house, trying to escape into the vast world, not knowing what the hell the world could be, because they just had clues from this guy Minerva, but they didn't really understand. Of course, we had Norman's death, and I'm so glad that I could talk about this in this video, because again, there's gonna be massive spoilers for the Promised Neverland. So if you don't want that, skedaddle fam, but get your booty out of here, take your ass back to that Promised Neverland anime type of shit, because we're talking. Before we even get into it, because we're gonna break shit down, but seeing Norman's return, that was somewhat shocking. I mean, I was kind of spoiled to it before I actually seen it, but I didn't know how it was going to happen. I didn't know exactly if that would, because you never know with manga, like it could have been like a clone or some shit, so I wasn't exactly sure how it was gonna happen. But I will say, leading up to it, when we started getting the new Minerva and all that stuff, I was like, for the longest time, like, oh yeah, that's probably Norman. Like, yeah, no doubt about it. That was my thoughts going into that, for like however many chapters it was foreshadowed that there was a new Minerva and shit like that. But anyway, we're jumping way ahead, because shortly after escaping the Gracefield house, they eventually go to this shelter and they meet this guy that is unnamed for the longest time up until the end of his saga or his story. We didn't know that his name was Yugo, and we find out that this dude was crazy. Like, I remember it like it was yesterday reading this shit. I was like, damn, this feels like a zombie survival film. And for the longest time, whenever there was scenes with Yugo and Lucas, I felt like I was watching like one of those Day of the Dead, early 90s, late 80s type of zombie films, because it really felt like that. It even at one point felt like I was watching Rambo when they were, you know, going at it with the people that was sent from the Rotry family. I think that's how you pronounce it or whatever. But From that point on, again, you started seeing, okay, this is going to take a different turn. You see that he goes on a mission with Emma and Ray, and obviously he has the worst intentions at that particular point, because dude is kind of crazy. He lost his people 15 years ago after they escaped, and they, you know, ended up in Goldie Pond, and then it kind of leads into Goldie Pond. And Goldie Pond, I feel as though, in retrospect, it took up way too much time. While I was reading it, I was thinking to myself, well, I know the manga's ending. And obviously when you're reading it, you know, especially if you was caught up at that particular point, you're not really thinking, well, how long is this series going to be? Because I'm reading it and I'm like, okay, well, the manga's about to end soon. And Goldie Pond is lasting a long time. I think that alone was as well about 35 chapters. And that took up a chunk of time that I felt like was, in retrospect, again, potentially wasted. Because it's after Goldie Pond, once we really hit about chapter 100, and there's obviously a little bit before that or whatever, but after Goldie Pond, the pacing just went balls to the wall, and I think I understand why. Because don't get it twisted, Goldie Pond has some incredible moments. We meet a lot of the kids that are gonna last with us through the rest of the story, because it's essentially like some crazy carnival, basically like a hunting ground for some of these royals that are doing it on the sneak tip, because we find out all these mysteries, that the world is separated into two different parts. There's a human world, there's a demon world, but there's still a set of rules. You're not supposed to hunt, and they're doing this, you know, again, sneakily. And I think it was dope too when we met Lucas, which again, Lucas kind of felt like, I don't know, he reminded me of like a OG Dragon Ball type of character with his design and the scar and shit. Like, he was a cool dude as well. And to be honest with you, those were two of my favorite characters of the entire series. When they went out like G's after the Rotary family went after them, I'm not gonna lie, I felt very sad. Like, if there's anything you could say about The Promised Neverland, yeah, there's a lot of problematic issues, but when it hits the feels, boy, do I feel very freaking sad. I be feeling extremely sad, because, you know, you get used to this character, of course, and they make it out of Goldie Pond after a massive strategy. And again, this is where the story felt totally different. It's like they're using guns and shit like that. Like, imagine they just had one pistol, they would have just grabbed Mama by the neck and be like, yo, get us out of here right now. Obviously a lot of that stuff doesn't come till it's necessary to fight, you know, the demons or whatever, because you can't just like, hey, little 12-year-old Emma gonna just punch a demon in the face and be like, yo, you a pussy, let go. But definitely Goldie Pond, in retrospect, with 181 chapters, that lasting that long should have been probably cut in half. It should have been cut in half, and maybe even less than that, just because it took up so much ample time that could have been used on, you know, the 7 walls, when we find out about the 7 walls, or getting to the promise, you know, the place to make the promise and whatnot. With I still to this point don't know what to call that thing, because it was just like some weird symbols every single time that thing was mentioned, but basically like the god of these two worlds. Like, all of that stuff should have been way more of importance, and should have had a lot more emphasis and a lot more time spent than Goldie Pond. Not that Goldie Pond was a bad arc per se, it wasn't my favorite arc, but it was a good arc, but it just felt like it lasted way too long. Cut out half those demons, cut out half of those events, and it still would have been pretty freaking strong. But again, at that particular point, I'm not sure exactly what the state of the series was. In my opinion, just my opinion, my theory, I think that The Promised Neverland possibly was originally intended to maybe just be all housed within the house, right? And their escape was going to be possibly the end of the series. I think after they had word that, yo, this is really popular, they had to extend it somehow. So then they get to like Goldie Pond, they get to this big holy shit, like, you know, demons and everything, all of that jazz, and then possibly the anime, the build up for the anime, or the anime dropping itself wasn't as successful, and then Jump doubles back and says, well, we know we told you to extend it, that this could last hundreds and hundreds of chapters, but actually, you know, you're not gonna be around that long. So then probably their plans got dashed again, because if you see the pacing of Golden Pond, it feels like, oh, this series is gonna last a long time, and it doesn't. I mean, it lasted a little bit longer, you know, about a year or two longer than after Goldie Pond, but it still feels as though that was the pace that was set, of like, you know, that kind of not slow per se, but definitely giving you a lot of details, a lot of information, and then it's just zoom. Because then shortly after that, we get back, we link up with, because Hugo and Ray come and, you know, Goldie Pond, and oh, we got all these kids more, now we have a bigger group, which that's something that I'm sure annoyed a lot of people, that Emma's do-gooder, we're gonna save everybody, everything has to go accordingly, everything's gonna go great. That probably annoyed some people. In retrospect, for me, as I finished the series today, like literally maybe a half an hour ago, I just finished reading it, I'm not that upset about it, because it would be really depressing in this terrible situation of these children fighting for their lives against monsters if Emma was like always depressed and being like, man, we got no choice, you know, we got no hope of winning. I would have been like, yo, come on, perk up a little bit. You gotta do something. Like, you can't just sit there, lay down and die. So then we get to the Ratri invasion, because they have their little shelter, their little home. They were living good for a while there. And you got Hugo and Lucas. This was their moment, because the Ratri come in. They've been spotting them out, because they're, of course, the escapees, the food that escaped, so to speak. And the Ratri got to make sure that, yo, the demons don't find out about this. And it's all out war. And I'm not gonna lie, that part of the story, it felt like Rambo. It felt like an old Schwarzenegger shootout film. It just felt nuts. Like, it was freaking crazy. And again, that arc right there, that small ending of everything, really solidified that of my top 5 characters, at the very least 2 of them had to be Hugo and Lucas. Like, the way they went out, allowing the children to continue at the cost of their lives, fighting against these soldiers and shit, and how they, till the bitter end, you think that Lucas is dead, you think Hugo's done for, and then they blow the whole shit up. Like, that was incredible and amazing, and that was probably some of my favorite stuff of the entirety of the series, being honest. Like, that little mini war right there, the invasion into their shelter and everything, like, Hugo and Lucas were hands down 2 G's, and I was really, really sad when they died. I'm not even gonna lie, I was messed up. I was like, oh no, not these 2, why? But it also gained me massive amounts of respect for them. Like, I was just like, oh, great characters. And again, I want to say it's around this time. My memory is a little bit hazy, because I've been reading all of this over the course of like a couple weeks, and it gets a little bit blurred. But it was somewhere around after chapter 100, I want to say, where it just felt ridiculously fast. Like, they start getting all the information about the 7 walls, about the promise, about the demons, about how to their plan and everything. Like, it was just like, what the hell? Some of this stuff felt like this was 2 or 3 arcs worth of material at the pace that we had the first arc and the Goldie Pond arc squeezed down into like handfuls of chapters, and I'm like, are you kidding me? So that's one of the things where I could definitely 100% agree with people that The Promised Neverland, it has its problems, and people don't like certain parts of it. And I would say the biggest problem that goes throughout the entirety of the series is pacing. It feels as though after that first arc, and they had to come up with this grand scale to keep the series going, they had so many plans. Again, the 7 walls alone just sounds like an adventure that could last 50 to 100 chapters in and of itself, trying to figure that shit out, and that was just squeezed down, and we get this time skip that kind of felt a little bit random, and I guess to a certain degree unnecessary. I think the biggest reason why they had to do the time skip was in order to make the Norman scenario seem believable, because we see and we find out, hey, Norman didn't die, and to be honest with you, for the most part, I was not under the impression that he was dead, just because we didn't get to see it. When people died in The Promised Neverland, we seen Sister Crone getting chomped on, we seen, you know, I wasn't even under the impression, to be honest with you, about Mama dying. Like, I was really like, at some point she's gonna return. We didn't see her die. We didn't see her get gobbled up. I don't believe so. So I was kind of looking at it like, yeah, he probably returned, and I think that's why they had the time skip happen, because Norman was a little, you know, he was a little guy, so give a couple years, even though it still is like he went from looking like he was 10 to looking like he's 18 and shit with that time skip, opposed to the other 2, which they kind of, you know, they looked a little bit older, like appropriately, but Norman is just all of a sudden, he's impersonating William Minerva. I was glad, considering the fact that there was a lot of characters that came back from the dead or survived somehow, that throughout the series they kept William Minerva as dead. That's one of the things I was like, okay, William Minerva, he was one of the people that was really guiding them, left all this information. Originally, that carnival of Goldie Pond was supposed to be like a safe haven and an escape to the human world. Obviously, he was betrayed, which set up the overall grander threat of the Ratri family, which, yeah, if you look at it, it's kind of almost like a Walking Dead type of scenario when you think about it, in terms of, and let me finish before people are like, get the fuck out of here, don't compare this to the Walking Dead is shit. Let me explain. While we have the demons, aka like the zombies in the Walking Dead, as a really, really big threat, and to be honest with you, when the series first started, you think that is the biggest threat, right? Like, even Mama is doing what she's doing because of those demons, but then you find out that really the Ratri have kind of been pulling the strings as well for their own benefit and for their own ideas and motives, which at the end of the day, Peter Ratri, to the very end, he was a bitch. I didn't like Peter Ratri, the way he went out and shit like that, how him and the sister basically betrayed William Minerva and shit like that. I was like, nah, y'all some scumbags. Y'all trash. To the bitter end, he went out like a little girl, like a little bitch. So I didn't really have sympathy for Peter. Like, you know, it was sad in a way just because it's like, Emma really wants everyone to live. Nobody gets hurt. Nobody dies. Nobody nothing. Like, even though you've been chomping on my friends and my people for years, like, for centuries, for millennia, don't worry about it. Like, we just need to hold hands and say, Kumbaya, my lord. Like, Emma, like, life ain't always that easy. But at the same time, I do appreciate, and I gotta keep stressing that, I do appreciate the fact that she was optimistic in all this. And sometimes in the worst scenarios, and I'm speaking from personal experience, you gotta be optimistic. You gotta try to make the, you know, aim for the stars. And if you land in the clouds, hey, at least you made it very, very friggin' high. So cutting back, Norman's return. And it was interesting how when we got back and we see Norman finally, after seeing him in that lab for the longest time or whatever, and we finally see what he's been up to with all the experiments from the Lambda house, or, you know, the Lambda farm or whatnot, how there's like these buff, creepy ass looking dudes and shit, and Norman has survived and whatnot. First of all, very emotional stuff seeing them, you know, reunited at last. But for the longest time, I felt kind of like Norman is too much of a bit of a secret dick, and Emma's too much of a very obvious optimist, and that's where you see the ideals clash. And to be honest with you, for the longest time, I was on Norman's side. I was like, yo, they've been chomping on y'all for years. They're systematically destroying you dudes. Like, keeping it a buck, and I'm not trying to bring in like some heavy shit into this, but essentially their ideals and the way they were looking at things was, Emma was Martin Luther King, Norman was Malcolm X. Norman was like, by any means necessary. Emma was like, yo, let's be peaceful, let's do things in a peaceful manner. Like, that's really the ideals that clash throughout the story after Norman is reintroduced. Norman got shit done, like, you know, blowing up these labs, scavenging for rations, the people that he had with him, Zazie, the chick that talked to dogs and shit, which I feel as though that she was underused, that like there was a lot more they could have done with her. And cutting back real quick, because I skipped over something again, I'm not covering everything. I'm trying to, as I have my notes and what comes to my memory, there's a lot of content. The evil-blooded too, Mujika and the other one, I definitely feel as though I didn't expect for them to play that big of a role, and I think to a certain degree there was a rewrite there, because after they had helped Emma and them early on in the series, then later on toward the end of it, after they, you know, walked away or whatever, they seemed kind of evil. Like, one of them I think even said, oh, I can't wait to finally eat humans again one day and shit like that. So you left with that impression that like they were shady, like they were helpful and they helped them escape and they were actually good demons, but they were kind of shady, because it was like plotline after plotline kept getting introduced. And again, if this was like a 400, 500 chapter series, I think it would have worked perfectly. But then we find out that demons, if they don't eat humans, they basically turn into like little bacteria, like they regress and they lose their humanoid features and all of that jazz. And only these two evil-blooded, because of her blood in particular, one of the evil bloods, they don't have to eat humans and they still stay with that human form. And again, I feel as though it was a big, massive rewrite, and it was just some great on their feet thinking from the mangaka to introduce that, because I don't feel like that was planned from the very start, because it felt like it came way later. And again, that ending of like them feeling like they were shady kind of was a long-lasting impression for me, until again we see them and we find out like they're the cure to demons eating people in general, and this is how we can have kumbaya. Definitely would say as the series progressed, Ray became less impressive and less important. Honestly, from the Lucas and Yugo situation on, Ray didn't feel like he was that big brain that solved everything and helped everything. Yeah, there was moments where he would be helpful, and yeah, there was moments where, like, you know, he figured out how to do Morse code and little elements like that. But in terms of being like, oh man, I can't believe, like, yo, Ray saved the day and shit like that, he definitely didn't have those moments anymore, because there was so many characters that were introduced as the story went on. Ray didn't have that special charm. So in terms of like story-wise, even towards the end with his interactions with Mama, which we're going to talk about that because that one hit, Ray didn't really feel like he had that importance that he once had. If anything, Norman, especially returning to the story, overshadowed. I would have loved to see Ray and Norman have another mental battle like they had way back in, you know, the first arc. And then after we really had Norman introduced into the story again and seeing that Emma's like, yo, I'm going to stop this without having to have this war and without having to wipe out the demons, and of course Norman kept going with it or whatever. There was a lot of focus on the demons, which again, if we had like a long time to work with it, it would have been great. It would have been awesome to expand on it. it, but because we didn't have that much time, it felt like every time the focus left the crew and their survival situation, for me personally, I'm speaking personal experience, I lost a bit of interest. I would lose interest. I'd be like, okay, the demons, okay, the queen, and it's good to give some structure and stuff like that to the story to make everything make sense, why this is happening, why we have a villain after the villain and a villain behind that villain, but it just felt not that interesting compared to the survival struggle. And again, like, and I've totally thought about this comparison starting this video. I didn't have it written down, whatever, but it's kind of like Walking Dead. Like, it was so awesome when they were trying to survive the walkers, but once it became like this big political struggle and, like, you know, finding out about this person that is actually really bad and the demons aren't, or the zombies weren't really a big issue, that's kind of how it started to feel at times with the manga. I mean, it feels as though it would kind of lose a little bit of its groove, and it's like, oh, we're finding out about, you know, the queen's lineage and stuff like that, and then it'll kind of reel it back in, like, oh shit, something crazy's happening with Emma, or, you know, she's getting lost. Like, when we get to the whole thing of her trying to reach the promise with Ray, honestly, that was just a little bit like, what the hell is going on here, where they start shrinking into babies and talking about basically like manifesting ideas. It felt more of a statement, honestly. It felt more like a simple thing, you could argue, but like basically like your mind is really powerful, what you believe in can come to fruition, sort of like a testament to manifestation. Like, that's kind of what I felt with that arc. And of course Ray couldn't go, and then Emma makes the promise that left us for the longest time until the very end. Well, what the hell was the promise? And of course we find out, and we'll talk about that in a second, because I do think that the ending was the biggest thing that pissed a lot of people off regarding Emma's promise. Then we had the final battles, first of all against the queen and shit, and to be honest with you, it felt as though the weapons were a lot more helpful than probably they should have been, because when we start off as like these indestructible demons, and we find out their weaknesses, you know, their eye, and you know, them having 2 cores, which honestly, that also felt like a rewritten ass pull at the end, when that one demon that we killed way back, was he from Goldie Pond? I want to say he was from Goldie Pond, returned, and he basically helped to not get the 2 evil-blooded ones murdered in the execution and all that shit. That kind of just came out of nowhere. And again, if it would have had time to properly been showcased, maybe at some given point have a couple panels or a couple pages or a whole chapter to showcasing him still being alive, and then like, yo, we don't see him for like 40 chapters and then bam, he shows up, that would have made a little more sense. But kind of just felt like, hey, here he is. And I would argue as well, the return to the Gracefield orphanage didn't feel as impactful as it should have been. Like, when we go towards the end and we see that Mama Isabel is still alive and she's a grandmother now, because we just got to see the house again during the whole thing of Emma and Ray trying to get to the promise, and mind you, it was empty and shit, but it didn't feel as impactful. And to be honest, when we seen the new Mama, she really had like no importance whatsoever. Like, we see, I think, a couple panels of her when Mama's like, yo, we're gonna dismantle shit, when we're getting the flashback of her betrayal and shit like that. So even the new Mama didn't really have much of a like again, lack of pacing, like pacing just being all over the place. But returning to Gracefield for the finale, you know, them trying to free everybody and get away and whatnot, just didn't have a big impact. I was like, oh yeah, we just saw Gracefield like 30 chapters ago, cool beans. Like, hey, there's Mama. Like, those scenes, I'm not gonna lie, Mama, she still demanded my attention. She still got it, to be honest with you. Like, her being in the finale is what made the finale and salvaged a lot of the story for me. Like, don't get me wrong, I was still invested, I still enjoyed, I had a lot of moments that I did enjoy, but it didn't feel like the way The Promised Neverland felt it could have been. Like, because again, the rushing through shit like that. But when Mama showed up, when we see her again, I'm like, I can't stop reading, holy shit. And then finding out that she betrayed the Rod Tree, she points a gun at Peter, all of that shit was incredible. And then the best moment of the finale for me personally, the last 5 or 10 chapters, was when Mama threw herself in front of Emma and them to stop that demon from killing them. I was like, damn, I want to cry. Like, that was incredible. And depending on how the anime goes, because I'm scared for the anime, to be honest with you, I feel like there's so much ground they got to cover, and if they don't do like 50 episodes to cover all this shit, doesn't feel like they're going to be able to do it justice. It might have a botched season 2 and call it a day, and I hope not. But Mama did an incredible job. That was really, really sad. It's like, oh, they finally, you know, they thought they were going to live with their mom in the new world, and yeah, it didn't happen. So that was definitely tragic, and probably the highlight of the ending of everything, because it was a great moment. You know, a mother's duty, a mother will do anything for her children, and kind of her reaping what she sowed. Despite, you know, her helping the children at the end, she still sacrificed a lot of children to these demons, you know, out of fear all those years. So even though she had to change her heart, she did a lot of dirt, so she ended up paying the price in the end, and that was really, really tragic. Then the ending with the promise finally being intact, Emma having to pay the price. The reward was her memories of her family being taken away. So despite everybody getting to get sent to the human world and all that jazz, Emma is separated and she has no memories of her family. And to be honest with you, it gave me a little bit of a chill, and I felt a little bit uneasy when they were describing what happened in between 2015 to 2047, I think is, or 2049, somewhere. It was like a large gap of where the world is at that particular point, and it was talking about epidemics, like real world shit that's going on right now. And I'm not gonna lie, that made me feel a little uncomfortable, talking about in those 10 years from, I think it was 2000 or 20 years between 2020 to 2030 or 40 or some shit, that there was a world war and the world government is all one. It was kind of creepy. And after the Death Note one shot kind of started showcasing of life imitating art, that scared me, like, ugh. And not to get political, please nobody come, well, let me tell you why, like, alright, whatever, you win. But the ending, to be honest with you, because remember, the promise was to take away the memories, like that was the trade, like you all will go to the new world, or the human world, shall I say. I keep saying new world, this shit ain't One Piece. You all go to the human world, nobody will die, none of that shit. And since I can't really take your family, because part of your promise is you want your family, I'm gonna take all your memories away. So it kind of reminded me of like the last episode of Teen Titans, the original, where Beast Boy sees Terra again, and she's like, yo, I'm not Terra. Except with this one, the thing where I think people are pissed off about was the finale, that Emma actually got reunited, and despite not being able to remember them, essentially they're going to create new memories in the human world, which the human world is like, you know, a futuristic, you know, 20-30 years off from where we're at right now. To be honest with you, the ending I wasn't that hype about, just because it's like, okay, so the only trade-off is that she gets a fresh start in this world with them, which if anything, that's not a bad thing. If anything, it's like Emma went through the most shit through all this, right? And don't get me wrong, she treasured her family, but being able to wipe the slate clean, not having to think about all the horrors and nightmares of what she went through, the struggle, because remember, most of this shit was on her shoulders throughout the series. And don't get me wrong, I think maybe Norman and Ray should have probably been wiped clean too, but it probably impacted her the most, a positive, beautiful soul like Emma. So to be able to wipe the slate clean and start a new life with her family that she loved, even though she's not really able to remember them, she still gets the reward of being able to start over and like leaving that life of hell that she had completely behind. So I understand why people are upset about it. I look at it in a sense of like, yeah, Emma kind of deserved a happy ending after the hell she went through. So is it given a trade? I'm not pissed off about it. Do I consider the series a classic or anything like that? By no means. No, it has some incredible moments. It has some very, very heartfelt stuff that made me get really, really sad. Like when Mama was killed and the kids are all around her body and shit, I was really, really broken up about it, just being honest. But as a whole, The Promised Neverland, the biggest issue, as I've said throughout this video, without a shadow of a doubt, the pacing. And I do think that was Shueisha or Shonen Jump or whoever's in charge rushing the mangaka, telling them 1 minute like, hey, this is a hit, you know, write a 1,000 chapters worth of story setups and shit like that, and then coming back and saying, no, actually end this shit within a year or two, and vice versa, just going back and forth with it. And that's why I think, you know, you go Goldie Pond, the arc that was kind of important but not the most important, last 35 chapters, then finding the 7 walls and all that shit lasts about 5. Like, yeah. So is The Promised Neverland manga perfect? Nah. Does it have a lot of heart and emotion to it? Yeah, and that's the thing that I really enjoyed about it. But I'm curious, for the people watching that read the manga, what do you think about The Promised Neverland? How did you feel about that finale, how it ended? Do you think it was bad, good, terrible, loved it? How do you feel about the characters, what went down? What do you think about Mama's death? How do you feel about the pacing? You think that I was on point regarding that being one of the biggest issues? And I could argue as well, one of the biggest issues that people really didn't like is the fact that everything Emma wanted ended up happening in a good and positive way. Some people want tragedy, but, you know, she wanted to live happily with her family. Didn't necessarily work out like that. Her memories was wiped. She wanted Mama to, you know, when she saw her, like, be a part of things. Didn't get that as well. She wanted Lucas and Yugo to be around. Didn't get that as well. Cut the kid a break, you know, growing up as cattle to these monsters and being able to liberate yourself. I think it was well deserved. And your final thoughts on the manga? Again, we probably won't be talking about The Promised Neverland for a while until the anime returns, and I'm not sure how that's gonna go. They could botch it, it could be great, who knows. But yeah, until we meet again, Promised Neverland, Emma and the gang. It was great. It was a very awesome time, very tragic time, and I'm gonna miss this one. My life changed a lot since the start of this in 2016, I believe it was, till now. Like, so much has changed, and yeah, thanks for the great moments and making a change in Shonen Jump and just being around while my life changed as well. Later. Also, don't forget, people, to check out the links in the description below to download One Punch Man Road to Hero for the iOS and Android mobile RPG game that you're gonna have a fun time. There's tons to do on that game, and I think you'll have a great time with it. That's all I have for this one, though. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you liked anything I had to say or enjoyed the video, drop me a like. I'd greatly appreciate it. And if you want more from me, make sure to subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram. Hit that bell to get all notifications. And if you want to follow any of my other social media, links are in the description below. I'm ForneverWorld, and as always, people, have an awesome day. And remember the golden rule: anime and manga for life, boy. Have an awesome day. Peace in. And it's been real, Promised Neverland. Like, shit was crazy.
Everything good always comes to an end. If you stab me in my back, we can never make amends. Trying to move to acceptance, hard to accept it. Mistakes like mirrors, gotta reflect it. I don't wanna fucking leave, but I gotta leave. Leave the maybes to the crazies. Maybe one day there I go, admitting something in a subtle way. No more copies, leave without a trace.